So, have you ever handed a parent or friend who has never played video games before a controller and tried to teach them how to play video games, but regardless of your best efforts, they just walk into walls and eventually give up in frustration? If so, this video is for you, because I'm going to break down how I was able to get one of my parents to play entirely through Deltarune Chapter 1 with some success, and how your parents or friends who have never played games before can do the same. I'm Etra from Games for Non-Gamers, and this is How Your Parents Can Play, a series where I try to find the best way to teach new players how to play a certain game. And today we're going to look at Deltarune, a friendly RPG where nobody has to die. Basically, what I did is I had my mom play through Chapter 1, and I noticed what problems we came across. I then found ways to fix those problems and tested if those solutions worked with a friend who has also never played video games before. There will be Chapter 1 spoilers in this video because we're going to be analyzing my mom's experience with the whole chapter. However, we're mostly going to talk about the first hour or so, since this is where most things can go wrong. But before I start, if you are planning on teaching anyone how to play any video game, you need to know about two things. First, I highly recommend that new players start learning how to play games with Journey over any other game I've talked about. I have a whole video about that linked here if you want to start there instead of at Deltarune. Secondly, to teach a new player any video game, you need to keep in mind something game designers like to call flow, which is the state in between being too frustrated or bored with a challenge. Usually, a game gets harder as the player becomes more skilled, which creates a gradually rising difficulty curve inside this state of flow. The big issue with introducing new players into gaming is that there is so much they are just expected to know that is never taught to them, like what health, stats, menus, and items are, and because of that, a new player can easily be overwhelmed and frustrated before they even pick up the controller they have never touched before. On the other side of this, if you introduce every aspect of a game piece by piece with no challenge, they will become bored and disinterested in the game. Our goal, like any game designer, will be to make sure our new players stay in this flow state by introducing them to important information while still giving them a challenge. And this may be the main reason why so many people will tell you to never take away the controller and finish a section for your new player. This instantly communicates to them that they can't complete the challenge in front of them, which takes them right out of the flow state and into frustration, possibly to the point of quitting. So with all that in mind, I'm going to throw this difficulty chart up in the corner here to point out where our new player encountered problems. Now, at the time of this test, my mom's only real gaming experience has been Pawn and Mario Kart. So before we began, I made two detailed instruction sheets that taught her how to play. The first sheet taught her how to use menus. I gave her that one right at the start because navigating menus is all you do in Deltarune's odd opening. I thought just learning the menus first would keep her from becoming overwhelmed, and I thought the creepy narrative would keep her at least somewhat engaged. But after 7 slow minutes of menus, I could tell she was already getting bored. Then she was frustrated once her character was discarded and her time was wasted. So we were off to a great start. After the intro, I handed her the second set of instructions, which were about walking and interacting with objects. She quickly learned how to walk and naturally learned about room transitions when she followed Toriel out this door. All was well for a solid 30 seconds, but then we reach a snowball of frustration, starting with this staircase that sent her in an endless loop, hitting a dead end in the bathroom, text progressing without her pressing anything, talking to everyone in this classroom except for the person she needs to talk to, not knowing why she can't move in these cutscene moments, Susie making fun of how slow she walks, and 32 minutes. 32 minutes and nothing interesting has happened in the plot, and the gameplay has only been frustrating. And of course, I had to explain what saving was to her right here, which overwhelmed her even more. On the bright side, right after this snowball of frustration, she seemed to enjoy the first part of the Dark World, especially stuff like figuring out how sliding works all by herself. Discovering game mechanics naturally like this might be able to help players get back into the state of flow, only if the challenge of finding out what this does isn't spelled out to the point of being boring and can easily be discovered so it isn't too frustrating. And this section of the Dark World is full of this game-guided discovery which teaches mechanics, and it almost pulled my mom back into this state of flow. First, she sees this blob. Then she encounters a second one, but it glows red and starts to attack. This scene teaches a lot by associating taking damage with this heart, which you move with the arrow keys to dodge white projectiles, which may seem familiar. This is also a test of the mad walking skills your player has practiced.
Happy feet, one more combo, oh!
Now, stuff like this usually isn't noticed by veteran capital G gamers, but easy challenges like this at the start of the game at least help my non-gamer mom feel more engaged with the game. And I'm pretty sure this teaching and challenge was intentional because right after that, our player is tested on facing objects and interacting with them in the form of this simple puzzle. And finally, we get a chase scene, which develops the damage concept introduced earlier. The spades falling from above help guide your eyes toward this bar with HP that depletes every time you are hit. This gave my mom a sense of what HP was without saying a word. This whole section that secretly teaches new players the game's core mechanics while putting them into a state of flow is why I thought Deltarune would be a great game for teaching new players how to play video games. But then I am proven wrong with a full 5 minutes of unskippable dialogue that dragged my mom into a bit of boredom, and then this happens. And my mom just sat there for 34 seconds in a bit of shock. I think this broke her. We have enemy health bars, allied health bars, toilet paper, HP, 5 runic symbols, and a brand new text bar. I guess this is the equivalent of going on the date with Papyrus in Undertale, but only if all those wacky stat bars were vital to your survival. I thought this would be the most overwhelming section of the game, but I believed she would at least be able to select an action. However, there was no association from earlier menus to this. As I finally started to explain what was going on, Lancer charged at the heart, and it seemed like any association she once had with the heart, damage, and HP were all gone. She was completely off her flowchart and into the realm of frustrated and overwhelmed. I simply thought she'd be a bit confused here and everything would be cleared up when battling was fully explained by Ralsei in a minute. When the mess of the battle was over, she said she wanted to stop, and we agreed to try again in a month. Yet with her experiencing roughly 37 minutes of frustration with only 8 minutes of this flow state, this whole experiment seemed kind of hopeless. So how do we fix this first batch of problems in this semi-train wreck for new players? Well, the first thing I did for her second playthrough was remove the entire opening segment up to the classroom, since the opening didn't help her with the battle menus, and even learning to walk in this area only served to frustrate her. Then I edited the text in the classroom to make each character guide you towards talking to Noelle here, clearing up that talking to everyone but Noelle problem. Finally, I modified her controller with a magic ingredient. The keys were now color-coded for either movement or interaction. This sped up her base movement speed drastically, since she barely needed to look for what keys to press. Seriously, if you take away one thing from this video, have it be that adding stickers to whatever controller a player uses will probably be the most productive thing you can do to help a new player learn how to play video games, since they will spend more time in the game and less time breaking their immersion to look at their hands. Anyway, with these 3 changes, we got to an interesting part of the story in 7 minutes instead of 32 minutes, which helped with the pace just a little bit. From earlier, I learned the hard way that a new player needs to at least be familiar with the battle system before they encounter it, or else they'll go into shock. It pained me to teach fighting outside of the game, but I gave my mom 2 more information-packed sheets of paper, which was overwhelming, but not nearly as overwhelming as everything appearing at once. Then, in Ralsei's tutorial, I showed her where everything was in relation to the battle chart in front of her, and she seemed to loosely grasp the fighting system, which was so much better than the chaos beforehand. Now we finally got into real battles, which scared me at first, but it actually went really well. She only fought opponents instead of trying to spare them, probably because it was just simpler to attack. I had no objections at this point because I was trying everything in my power to keep her from being overwhelmed again. I occasionally suggested strategies and guided her on stuff like defending and healing when she asked for a refresher. She kept on improving the actual act of fighting until she was getting perfect hits. She did so well that she actually got through the whole first area without dying, which was shocking to me, but also great for this experiment because dying would cause a mass amount of frustration. She was slowly getting into a state of flow. And then we get to this puzzle, which I'm going to say it right now, this is going to be the most frustrating thing for new players. Not teleportation, the checker dance, or the chaos key. No. An unskippable button puzzle is probably going to be a more frustrating challenge, and I'll tell you why. Do you have that one family member who can play Mario Kart, but only Mario Kart for some reason? That's my mom. And if you know any of these only Mario Kart players, you know they never drift. Why? Well, it requires 2 button presses and timing the second button press. Pressing one button is simple enough, but it seems like pressing 2 buttons at once seems to be an alien concept to any non-gamer. This makes a bit of sense when you consider that in any other use of a keyboard, like writing emails or papers, pressing 2 buttons at once would mess up whatever document you are writing. It seems like this fear of pressing 2 buttons on a keyboard at once transferred to Deltarune. In this puzzle, she needed to press 2 buttons to walk diagonally here, and she also had to time a 3rd button press to dash, all while under a very strict time limit. This didn't go well for my mom, who spent her first 4 minutes not knowing the character's feet had to be touching the buttons and not just their bodies. With all that said, I'm pretty certain this challenge will be extremely frustrating for any new player. However, I don't actually recommend skipping this puzzle. Instead, I think you should have your player play Deltarune with a controller instead of a keyboard. From what I found in other tests, players seem to get used to pressing multiple buttons at once when they don't have a voice in the back of their head saying, "If you press 2 buttons on the keyboard, you'll mess up the email, your family will leave you, and you'll die alone." With a controller, they don't have any good or bad habits trained to the device. So have your player play Deltarune with a controller, label the buttons they need, and this puzzle should go a bit smoother. Now, I'd never usually recommend this, but especially if your player only has a keyboard and they don't have a controller, tell your player exactly what to do in this part. Make sure the challenge of this section isn't learning what to do, rather, it's the challenge of doing these actions. It took my mom 6 minutes for each of these puzzles, but most of her frustration was somewhat relieved once she completed this seemingly monumental task. The only other fundamental concept of the game left to learn was items when they were introduced in the shop. The shop was actually pretty self-explanatory, and there weren't any real problems other than equipping the items that she bought. This is the only other time where I recommend telling the player exactly what buttons to press here, since this is likely the only time they'll open the equipment screen in the entire game. She really didn't have much trouble with the other enemies, but she did say the battles were getting a bit repetitive, probably because she only fought enemies. Getting through the teleporting rooms proved a solid challenge without becoming too frustrating. Also, this happened.
Ah! Just stayed up there. How is this happening? How is this happening? Ow! I'm the queen of the universe. What did you do? Well,
She then fought our almighty Lord and Savior, Leg Boy, and this is the first time she died. And it wasn't because she was bad at the game, but because she only used the fight option. She quickly found out you had to act to win this battle, and after that, she started incorporating acting and sparing into her battle strategy. The only real challenge past that were these Bloxer enemies, which I had to tell her to spare because otherwise they were too tough to beat since these things are literal tanks. The big issue with them is they lead straight into a boss fight with a long puzzle before it. So if your player dies, which they probably will since they just had to survive 4 of these guys just a few minutes before, they will have to start all the way back here. I really think Toby Fox just forgot to put a save point here, and don't worry, we'll fix that later. After that, there weren't really any big frustrating moments like earlier, My mom did say the game was getting a bit boring narratively, and I agree this whole Susie and Lancer section before the castle outstays its welcome a bit. And to top it off, it ends with a huge chunk of unskippable text. And to her, there was no payoff in the climactic Susie versus Lancer battle because she clearly knew that no one died in this game, which is a fact that is supposed to be hidden from the players until the very end of the chapter. She marched up the castle, missing a few fun interactions with Susie since she was almost always dead set on murdering everything. She had a short and easy encounter with the glorious Leg Boy and approached my biggest fear for this run, the Chaos King. She was doing great in the game so far, much better than I expected, to the point where it was making me question what difficulty truly is. But this is a harsh difficulty spike. And she did good enough on her first try, but she only attacked, which was basically futile since unless you are perfect, the King will automatically stop fighting you before you take his health down to 0. She had to wait it out, which an Undertale player would probably guess, but since this isn't how any of the other Deltarune bosses work, she would have only survived by luck. So after her first death, I gave in and directly told her she had to wear the King out. So she focused on defense and just barely won the battle. It shocked me that someone who has never played video games outside of Mario Kart and Pawn was able to beat the final boss of the chapter on their second try. Or it's not that big of a deal and I'm just salty because it took me 3 times to beat him. Who knows? Reconsidering the entire concept of difficulty, or I'm just bad at the game and salty. Take your pick. At the end of her run, my mom said she enjoyed parts of the game and was actually interested in playing Undertale, which was my goal from the start. So it was very rough, but I would call her part of the project somewhat successful. Still, with all the earlier problems, I do have to say that Deltarune is not the perfect game for introducing new players into video games, if that wasn't clear already. But how can we fix the remaining problems so we have it closer to a perfect teaching game? After the test with my mom, I invited a friend who has never played games before over, so she could play through the game as well. But before she played, I modified Deltarune to try and fix the problems my mom encountered. First, I got a mod for unlocking debug mode by these lovely fellows so I could make a save file for my friend that started at Alfie's classroom instead of hell. This mod also allowed me to save our new player right before the Clover boss battle. Next, I edited a moderate amount of text to hint at making certain decisions, like stalling out the Chaos King. Finally, I simplified the overly complex guides and cut battling down to 4 simple steps with extra info on the main 3 decisions of attacking, acting, or defending if needed. To get all of this, just click the link in the description below and follow the instructions on screen here to apply this mod pack to your game. All this stuff is written in the description as well, so you can just check there. If you do download this mod, I would love to hear of your experience and problems you encountered in the comments below, or more preferably in this custom Google form, also linked below. With this form, I can get more data for my own custom game for non-gamers I'm currently working on. So when our second new player started playing, I put the new control sheet next to a wonderfully stickered keyboard when she started in Alfie's classroom. Right before she got to the Lancer fight, I used the battle guide I made to teach her how to battle, and then reiterated the battle system with Rousey's tutorial. The only parts even close to frustrating for her was learning how to battle and the wonderful button puzzles I talked about earlier. When she finally got to the Chaos King, she was only 2 attacks away from winning on her first try before she died for only her 5th time in the entire game. So it seems to me that Chapter 1's difficulty doesn't seem to be a problem for new players. Chapter 2, on the other hand, I predict would be way too much. But in general, it seems like instead of difficulty, the larger obstacle for new players seems to be the fact that video games don't contain non-gamer tutorials that teach basic concepts like pressing several buttons at once, health, menus, and items. Which is why, over the past 2 years, I've been working on making phonics book-style video games that teach these concepts. If you want to help out with the development of that, click this video here and test out that game with any non-gamers you know, and leave me suggestions in the comments. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Bye.